It starts with a frantic shout, an urgent order ripped from the mouth of an officer. Your heart lurches, a familiar dread coiling in your gut. Another message must go out, and every other means of communication has failed. Again. The telephone wires are shredded, buried beneath churned earth, silent and dead. Flares might reveal your position, and pigeons are a gamble in this sky of lead. So it falls to you, the trench runner, the human link in a broken chain. You are not a fighter in the usual sense. You are a messenger, a ghost between the lines. Your survival hinges on speed, luck, and the chilling willingness to face certain death for a few crumpled words. The voice of despair. In the endless, muddy labyrinth of the First World War, communication was life. Commanders needed to know where their men were, what the enemy was doing, and where to send support. Without this flow of information, an entire offensive could collapse, trapping thousands of soldiers in a bloody, pointless struggle. But the battlefield of the Western Front chewed up everything, especially fragile copper telephone wires. Artillery barrages would tear through lines, leaving entire sections of the front cut off, deaf and blind to headquarters. Radios, a new technology, were often too bulky for the front, too easily intercepted, and not always reliable in the chaotic conditions of the trenches. Pigeons, while used, could be shot down or simply lost in the deafening din of battle. This is where you came in. You were the last resort, the most dependable, yet most vulnerable link. Typically, runners were low-ranking non-commissioned officers, like corporals, chosen for their physical fitness, incredible stamina, and a sharp ability to read maps. You carried the weight of vital intelligence, often memorizing complex messages in case the written orders were destroyed or made unreadable by the mud and blood. Sometimes you carried a sealed envelope, a discreetly folded piece of paper, or simply the words burned into your memory. Your mission was singular: deliver the message, no matter the cost. Unlike most soldiers, you were lightly equipped for speed and agility. No heavy field pack to weigh you down, often just a sidearm, a haversack for your meager rations, and a canteen. After 1916, a steel helmet became standard, and a gas mask was always clipped close, a constant reminder of another invisible killer lurking in the air. Some even wore a distinct red armband, a target for the enemy, but a marker of your grim purpose to your own side. Your survival was rarely expected, but always desperately hoped for. It was said that for a runner, it was merely a question of how long you would last before being wounded or killed. It was truly a thankless job, yet absolutely essential for keeping the war machine grinding forward. A message in the mud. Imagine the trenches themselves, a grim, unending wound carved into the earth. They were not straight lines, but zigzag patterns, designed to contain the blast of shell fire and prevent an enemy from firing down the entire length. Moving through these trenches was an exhausting effort. The ground was often knee-deep or deeper in thick, clinging mud, especially in places like Flanders with its high water table and constant rain. Every step was a struggle, each boot sucked down, threatening to swallow you whole. You would literally run a mile in a zigzag trench, only to advance a mere 300 feet as the crow flies. This was your highway, your only path, and it was a path of endless misery. Beyond the mud and the sheer physical effort, the trenches were a festering pit of disease. Rats, bloated and fearless, scuttled everywhere, feasting on the dead and the discarded, spreading sickness. Lice were a constant torment, infesting clothing, causing relentless itching, and transmitting trench fever, a debilitating illness with headaches, fevers, and muscle pain that could put a man out of action for weeks. Trench foot, a horrifying fungal infection caused by prolonged exposure to cold, wet conditions, was a constant threat, often leading to gangrene and amputation. Dysentery was common, fueled by unsanitary conditions and the desperate need to drink polluted water from shell holes or melted snow. These were the everyday companions of a trench runner, the constant background hum of suffering. Then there was the stink. A sickening mix of rotting corpses, stagnant water, unwashed bodies, human waste, and the sickly sweet smell of lingering gas. The air itself was heavy with death. Sleep, if it came, was fitful and interrupted, often in the mud or on sodden planks, with the constant threat of shelling or a surprise attack. You might wake with your eyelids frozen shut in the bitter cold of winter. This was the world you navigated, the hostile environment that tried to break you before the enemy even got a chance. the relentless gauntlet. But the true terror began when you received a message that demanded you leave the relative safety of the trench network. Perhaps communication was needed with an advancing unit during an offensive, or a critical update had to reach a distant command post across open ground. Stepping out of the trench was like stepping into another dimension, a landscape of craters and barbed wire, where every exposed movement drew immediate attention. This was the dreaded no man's land, a scarred, desolate expanse between the opposing lines. Here, you were a solitary figure, a moving target for the watchful eyes of enemy snipers and the merciless hail of machine gun fire. Artillery fire was an ever-present, indiscriminate killer. The ground would erupt in thunder and shrapnel, sending dirt, mud, and human remains flying. Running through a box barrage, where artillery fire isolated a specific area from support, was a common, terrifying reality for runners during an assault. You would run, sometimes multiple times, through this hell, the earth shaking, the air filled with the scream of incoming shells, the whistling of bullets. Your only defense was speed, agility, and perhaps a prayer. The risk was so immense that multiple runners were often dispatched with the same message, each taking a slightly different route, in the grim hope that at least one would make it through. It was a macabre lottery, where the odds were stacked against every participant. Finding your destination was a challenge in itself, especially in the churned, cratered landscape that bore little resemblance to any map. You had to be tough, resourceful, and possess an uncanny sense of direction, even in the dead of night or through thick fog. Sometimes, new to an area, you might wander too close to enemy lines, saved only by a watchful comrade. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. Beyond the trenches, within the mind, the physical dangers were brutal, but the psychological toll was arguably worse. Life as a trench runner was a constant dance with death, punctuated by moments of intense, overwhelming terror. The isolation of your job, often moving alone through the desolation, contrasted sharply with the claustrophobic closeness of trench life. You saw things that would haunt you for years. Shattered bodies, faces frozen in agony, the aftermath of a gas attack. These images, combined with the incessant fear and the knowledge that your luck could run out at any moment, wore away at the strongest minds. Soldiers in the Great War, especially those subjected to the relentless artillery barrages and the grim conditions of trench warfare, often developed what was known as shell shock. This wasn't weakness. It was a profound neuropsychiatric syndrome, a breakdown of the mind under unimaginable stress. For runners, this was a constant shadow. Symptoms included uncontrollable trembling, severe headaches, ringing in the ears, dizziness, an inability to focus, memory loss, confusion, and terrifying sleep disorders. Some experienced partial paralysis, stammering, or even lost the ability to speak. It was a helplessness that manifested as panic, fear, flight, and a shattered spirit. The constant exposure to death, the powerlessness against random shelling, the relentless hardships, all contributed to extreme stress and exhaustion. You lived in a state of hypervigilance, anticipating the next attack, the next bombardment, the next sudden, arbitrary end. The monotony of waiting, broken by sudden, violent bursts of combat, created a deep sense of despair and hopelessness. This psychological trauma, often dismissed or misunderstood at the time, left indelible marks, impacting soldiers long after the war had ended. The runner carried not just messages in their hands, but the psychological scars of the front deeply etched into their very being. The weight of silence. The life of a trench communications runner was a stark, brutal testament to the human cost of the First World War. These were the men who moved when others huddled, who faced the open maw of the battlefield when every instinct screamed for cover. They were the silent carriers of destiny, their brief, perilous dashes determining the fate of entire units. Each message they carried, each journey they undertook, was a thread in the vast, tangled web of the war, a thread often stained with blood and dirt. They endured the unspeakable conditions of the trenches, the constant threat of injury or sickness, and the terrifying reality of becoming a moving target in a landscape designed for death. Their bravery was not in charging with a bayonet, but in the simple, terrifying act of movement, of crossing the deadly spaces between safety and information. They were the unsung heroes, often forgotten, yet utterly indispensable. Their story is a chilling reminder that in the face of industrial-scale slaughter, sometimes the most cutting-edge technology was no match for a human body and an iron will. This grim reality of the trench runner's existence forces us to confront the true horror of that conflict. It reminds us that war is not just about grand strategies or sweeping battles, but about the individual, terrifying experiences of ordinary men thrust into extraordinary hells. If this descent into the past moved you, if the echoes of these forgotten voices resonate, then consider sharing the story. Let the sacrifice and the silent courage of the trench runners be heard, remembered, and understood. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this harrowing role, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the untold corners of history. Your engagement ensures these legacies are never truly lost.